Mr. Taylor is a former professional soldier, and he's the editor and publisher of Esprit de Corps since 1988. Since the inception of Esprit de Corps, Scott has logged over 1 million air miles as a war correspondent, reporting from such global hotspots as the Persian Gulf, Cambodia, Western Sahara, Croatia, Bosnia, Iraq, Turkey, Yugoslavia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Afghanistan. Scott regularly appears in the Canadian media as a military analyst and is the recipient of the 1996 Quill Award for outstanding work in the field of Canadian communications. In that same year, he also won the Alexander Mackenzie Award for Journalistic Excellence. He's also a weekly columnist with the Halifax Chronicle Herald. He's also a columnist for the Embassy Magazine and contributes to the Ottawa Citizen, Maclean's Magazine, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Sun, Reader's Digest, and the Global Television Network.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach, but I think a lot of the things which I'll put forward are certainly going to support what Malala Joy has just told you. She's coming at this from a perspective of being an Afghan, and I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who's gone there and reported 5 times unembedded, not going in with the troops. I'm an ex-soldier. Being here with a peace organization shows you just how much we need to know and how much we need to open the debate in Canada, how much we need to educate ourselves. And that's sort of the purpose of what we do. I'm working on a documentary now based on some of the interviews which we'll touch on quickly here today, some of the people that we've gone and met with. A lot of people which we don't normally see in the nightly news, but they're people that she mentioned, the people that actually do control Afghanistan. Now, just to explain, unembedded, when we go in, you can see from that slide, that's me with the baby. We dress like the locals, we grow beards, we grow our hair, and we spend weeks to prepare and go in, and still, no matter how many chances or things that we do to mitigate the risk, we stick out from about 200 meters away. They can tell that we're not an Afghan. So we can mitigate it, we can't eliminate it, and as you can understand, I mean, we've had journalists that have been kidnapped and certainly killed in Afghanistan. It is a risky endeavor. One of the characters that we give voice to, and she'll hopefully come up on the screen here, is General Rashid Dostum. We've met with him 3 times. He's difficult to get an interview from. He won't go on camera, but we can talk to him. He's the quintessential warlord in Afghanistan. I mean, this guy was originally a communist. He supported the Soviet Union. He supported Najibullah when he was still in power for a couple of years. Then when the warlords, Mujahideen, began to win, he discovered his Islamic roots and he became a Mujahideen. He switched sides. He changed the balance of power. He fought against Massoud. He fought with the Taliban. He fought against the Taliban. And then right after 9/11, as he says, he picked up the telephone and called Don Rumsfeld and said, "I'm your man in Afghanistan." And we've interviewed him. He says that if NATO were to support him, give him a 5,000-man army of his old fighters, support him with air power, he could eliminate the Taliban within 6 months. NATO officials agree. They say, yes, he could do that, but there would be a river of blood in southern Afghanistan. This man is a killer. I'm not sure how many he's killed by his own hand, but he certainly is a face and certainly a power broker in Afghanistan. She had mentioned the next character. His name is Mullah Rockety, which translates to Reverend Bazooka. He was a Taliban fighter who was good with an RPG. He is, since the collapse of his former Taliban government, discovered he's now a Democrat. He ran and understood democracy on the Taliban ticket, and he sits as a member of parliament. Interestingly enough, of the people that we interviewed, he was one of the few voices that said that NATO must stay longer. And the reason he said that was because the Taliban have been weakened in their fight against NATO, and that they will not be in a condition to fight the Northern Alliance, the other warlords who have gotten stronger during this period. So in a complete twist of irony, the longer NATO stays, the stronger the Taliban gets for the subsequent civil war that they plan to fight, which I found rather interesting. And again, people like Peter MacKay and whatever will say that we can't talk to the Taliban, we must deal with the Karzai government, but they actually are members of the Taliban that sit as members of parliament, which makes things very complex. This guy, Ustad Muakik, is the Hazara leader. He's the Shiite leader, the tribal leader, the warlord. The Hazaras are the lowest caste or ethnic caste, the only Shiites in Afghanistan. They tend to get quite a beating, but when they have the weapons and the power, they give out quite a beating as well. I think Ustad Muakik's phenom that he's noted for is disemboweling pregnant women of his enemies. He is one of the reasons that they passed the controversial rape law in the Karzai cabinet, allowing a man to deny his wife food if she doesn't put out her matrimonial duties in the bedroom. That was to appease him in order to get his election vote up last in 2009. One of the people we use as a source in Kandahar, probably the Westerner who knows Kandahar the best of anybody, is Sarah Chase. She runs a small soap factory there, employs about 8 people, speaks fluent Pashtun, knows the locals. She's allowed to operate there. She can get a feel for the pulse of the population. She was there when we talked to her. It was right after Minister Bernier had made the comments about the governor of Kandahar should be replaced because he was corrupt. And here there was a backlash and made it look like we were, manipulating the puppet of Hamid Karzai's government, and that we shouldn't be saying such things as diplomats. She said that at that moment he was the most popular man in Kandahar because he spoke the truth. And people of Kandahar would be very happy if whoever was in charge came in and actually respected the rule of law. And her question to us was, are the Canadian troops fighting and dying in Afghanistan to make a few Afghans rich, or to bring law and order, justice and prosperity to the average Afghan? Because at the moment, we're doing the former, not the latter. Noreen MacDonald, I traveled with her. She's changed the name of her organization. It was the Assembly's Council when I traveled with her to go out. And again, very difficult to ascertain and to take polls from the people in Kandahar. It's very dangerous, but she would go out dressed as a man. We would go out with armed guards, and she would try to conduct surveys, and the limited information that we could get was certainly insightful. And one of the things that I always remembered from those trips was what it means to be truly illiterate. We talk about illiteracy and what that means without understanding it. When we would get there, the kids, if they could see themselves in the playback on your camera, they were mesmerized. And you realize very quickly what they were mesmerized was because they know what their friends look like. They wanted to know what they look like. This is a place where there's no sanitation points. They've got no mirrors. I mean, this is abject ignorance and illiteracy. These people would not even know at the age of 6 or 7 what they look like, and that's a pretty phenomenal thing to try to grasp. This guy, the next one is Haji Alam Gul, and she recognizes him in some of these faces, all these main characters. He's the leader of the Kuchi Pashtuns, which are a nomadic tribe, very powerful, very influential. He sits as a member of parliament, and he's obviously opposed to the occupation, and he said to the effect of, if the West were to give every Afghan a golden house, we would still fight you to the death, which was very insightful in terms of we're not going to buy their long-term loyalty. Obviously, when you want to look back at a situation, people always refer to history. They say that Afghanistan is the deathbed of empires, etc., all the way back to Alexander the Great. The British have been in there 4 times. Of course, we go back to the Soviet Union. This individual, the current ambassador in Kabul, the Russian ambassador, was a young diplomat at the time that the Soviet Union pulled out, and he spent the next 2 years as the representative to the Najibullah communist government, which stayed in power. So he saw the mistakes firsthand that the Soviet Union made and how they dealt with it, and the machinations that went on, and things that he couldn't understand as a young diplomat, how they were allowed to transpire. People like Hekmatyar, the warlord, was allowed to come into Kabul, public enemy number 1, and met with Najibullah to discuss the post-Soviet occupation details of what's happening. Days after we spoke to this individual, Hekmatyar's people again arrived in Kabul and began negotiations with Karzai for what's going to happen after the Americans pull out. This isn't history repeating itself hundreds of years later. It's the same people, not their sons, not their grandsons, the same Afghans making negotiations to deal with the next generation. Another individual we dealt with was Akbar Bai. He's a Turkmen tribal leader. He knows firsthand. He's a very prominent individual. A couple of years ago, General Dostum, who I showed you earlier, had an argument with him, came to this individual's house in Kabul, shot one of his guards, came in, and then spent the next 24 hours mercilessly beating Akbar Bai. Despite his prominence in the Afghan society, no justice has yet to be done to Dostum. They all know what happened. In fact, Dostum raped this individual. I mean, that just gives you an idea of what sort of rough justice the leaders of Afghan society and the Afghan government currently in place. I mean, she talks about them being criminals. We talk to them and find out what their acts were. To do with the issue of women's rights and advancement, we spoke to Jennifer Rowell. In fact, she's interviewed in the Toronto Star today. She's back in Canada on a tour. She's been over there for 3 or 4 years. And she was quite open to the fact that they have actually regressed in terms of the advancements they were making since about 2004. In those early heady days, people had hope. They put women through to educate them, and then realized when they came out the other end, There was no place made for them in society, no place made for them in business. And without a network, a power-based network, they still have no protection and therefore no real power in Afghanistan. Other Taliban that we talk to, you can talk to them. This individual is under house arrest. He's a former ambassador for the Taliban to Pakistan. He's a mullah, al-Zayef. He spent 3.5 years in Guantanamo Bay. He was turned over to the Americans, and after 3.5 years, they realized that they couldn't actually convict him of anything, so he's been returned to Afghanistan where he's under house arrest. He still has contacts with his former cronies, and one of the statements he made, we talked to him in 2007 and again this year, right after the reconciliation and reintegration policies were being brought forward. At that same moment, the Americans were using assassination teams and airstrikes to kill off a lot of the top leaders, Taliban leaders in Pakistan. He said, if you're serious about negotiating, why are you killing off the only people you can negotiate with? If you kill one leader, then you're going to have to negotiate with 1,000 fanatics, because this is not a top-down hierarchical organization. This is a religious movement, and right down to the lowest illiterate cleric in the smallest village, people still follow them. They can't be eliminated. They're not just a militant wing. They have that, but they're definitely a religious movement. One ray of hope that we found, we're talking about the elections, which were completely botched, but one of the individuals who ran in that election was Dr. Ramazan Bashirdost. He is denied an office in Parliament, even though he won a seat. Hamid Karzai kicked him out. He quit Hamid Karzai's cabinet. He ran instead on an anti-corruption crusade, and with no backing from the West whatsoever, he came third. This guy's a dark horse. He believes, practices what he preaches, and one of the things he wants removed first and foremost is the corruption. He said the first place to target is the U.S. Embassy, the very same people that prop up Karzai, then go after the Karzai administration. He would love to have a task force and go in as an Elliot Ness type character to clean out. He knows he's got the boxes of documentation and you could take these guys out with the corruption, but people ignore him, particularly the West, and of course because the U.S. Embassy is his primary target, he gets no support from them. One of the prime objectives we hear over and over again for the Canadians is to build schools. We hear that we've built, I think, 5. When we were in Kandahar, we were outside the wire. We traveled to the largest high school in Kandahar. 4,000 students enrolled. They had a total of 400 books, and that's not titles, that's books. I think they had 2 computers, which they could only use whenever the power from the city was a couple hours a day. What he had none of, this is the principal, was teachers. All of his male teachers, and there is only no female teachers, his male teachers had gone to join the Army. As a soldier, they can make $120 a month. As a teacher, they can make $60. So we readily recruited them as eager young new soldiers, and what we've done is denied the next generation of Afghanistan. They've got a building, they've got a facility, but they've got no one to teach the next generation. So a lot of times we do short-term planning without looking at the long-term results. Now, one of the places we got into, I'm going to probably use up the rest of my time, the very contentious issue about detainees in Kandahar came to light in early spring of 2007. We were there. I happen to have a personal relationship with the head of NDS, Amrullah Saleh. You won't see his picture and you won't see him on film, but I climbed a mountain with him, I broke bread with him, and at the time, because it was a hot button issue in Canada, he granted us permission, my team, the only ones that got inside that actual detainee center in Kandahar where all those alleged torture was taking place. These were the conditions in 2007 when we got in there. Pretty abysmal. I mean, these guys were shackled, but did we see evidence of torture? Obviously not, but we're not stupid. I mean, they're not going to show us that. But the fact is they were willing to open up the doors to us. And as a result of that, I mean, then Canadians did, as you remember, begin doing regular inspections and follow-up. We went back in 2008, and improvements had been made. This was now the new wing that they'd built. All the prisoners had a light blue uniform. They were obviously, things were much cleaner. They had a garden. So they had changed the standards that were in there as a result of the scandal. They were still shackled, but at least now they had clean sandals and clean uniforms. But again, when you talk about the politics of this issue, the fact that it got involved in who said what, who knew what, when they did find out, they did make improvements. And unfortunately, because this government will not admit that they knew and that things were wrong, they won't come out and take the credit for what they did do, which was make improvements to the lives of those individuals. Again, as a result of the relationship with Amrullah Saleh, we got the rare opportunity on 2 occasions to go in and interview inside the Kabul prison would-be suicide bombers, guys that they picked up before they could actually detonate their explosives. This is Ghulam Razol. He came from Pakistan. He'd been recruited. He was the guy they caught this year. He was questioned about why he came. He wanted to, as he says, conduct jihad against Westerners. But one thing he was adamant about was that he was not a Taliban follower. So in other words, this thing has already jumped that safety net. We can negotiate with the Taliban now, but as we're seeing as evidenced in the tribal areas and the attacks going on now in Pakistan, this war has now jumped that firewall. And the last guy we'll show is Shaki Rula. We interviewed him in 2007, I believe. He was 15 years old at the time, and he was literally mentally handicapped. He'd gone into the madrasa to be educated. At the end of the day, he couldn't learn his lessons. He was told that his parents couldn't afford to bring him back to the village, so he had to do a mission for the clerics and the mullahs, and that was to conduct a suicide bombing. He didn't understand what suicide bombing meant, and luckily for him, the wiring in the car, it was being remotely detonated, did not go off. He was in a crowded market on New Year's Day. They got him. He still believed that somehow he was going to be reunited with his mother if he committed this act. So again, they're using people against us. This we just want to show you sort of the face of the enemy. And again, the reason for these slides is, and the background is just to sort of open up the floor to some of the things that we've researched in the depth of, or the extents that we've gone to try to bring back this information, just to let you know just how complex a situation this is. It's not about good guys and bad guys. That's just overly simplistic. People say we need to maintain the mission. What mission? What does victory look like? If victory means propping up Hamid Karzai's regime for another 10 years, that's not victory at all. I'll end on that note.
Frank's sister lost her life in Afghanistan, mine, and a cousin of mine also has served on several tours with the Canadian forces in Afghanistan. And, when I think of them, and I see, the presentations that you've both given today, I mean, it's a very frustrating, saddening thing to think that friends and family are risking or losing their lives without producing much in the way of a tangible result for people in Afghanistan or for people back home, maybe. I guess my question is, I guess that this event that we were invited to is called, the way forward on Afghanistan. What is the way forward? If NATO were to start pulling out tomorrow, what would happen in Afghanistan? What should happen? I guess those are very broad, big questions, but that's my question for either of you.
Question: what would happen if NATO pulls out? Unfortunately, everybody in Afghanistan realizes that there will be more fighting amongst themselves. I mean, obviously, we haven't delivered prosperity to them. We haven't really delivered on education. Opportunities that were missed early on in 2002, 2003, there was hope from the population that there would be a change. They're not seeing that manifesting itself into anything tangible. And, I mean, is it too late? Not really. I mean, we could change, and I'll answer the second question as well if I can. We could do things a lot differently. I mean, we could reinforce success. Obviously, we're coming in this as a NATO coalition. Mostly Christian European or North American countries are supplying troops in a country where it's still illegal to convert to Christianity, punishable by death. We're supporting a corrupt regime that doesn't have a democratically elected mandate anymore. I mean, we've lost all focus. Other elements, such as the Turkish, the only Muslim country in NATO, their troops have not suffered a single fatality due to hostile attack. They've supplied more troops during the period they've been there just because the locals have a history, there's a cultural connection, and there's a religious connection. They have not been targeted. Obviously, Turkey can't take the whole mission over, but there are other things to do. I mean, and they treat it differently. Their PRTs are non-judgmental. They don't have a combat mission. They go in, if they produce economic benefits, and it happens to be in their province a Taliban stronghold, so be it. The people, they figure if they benefit economically, they will then socially develop, and you can begin to educate, and things might change slowly. We keep hearing it's a marathon, not a sprint. We keep approaching it like it's a series of sprints. We've never, and I've always, been shocked that we've never implemented an apprenticeship program. All the construction that we've done, we've built things there. They can't even maintain them because we've never bothered to educate the workers to become carpenters, electricians, or plumbers. We go in, we build it to our standard. We're impatient, and we've gone through this, but repeatedly telling the Canadian public, look, it's a long-term mission. The military element isn't the only element. sending warriors to Afghanistan, the one thing they've got too many of is warriors. We need to send doctors, we need to send educators, we need to send some other element, but definitely not more soldiers, not beyond the pullout date.